All right, let's bring you some analysis on that discussion. Now, joining us is Bill van Esveld, pardon me. He's the acting Israel and Palestine Associate Director at Human Rights Watch. Bill, it's great to talk to you. Thanks very much indeed for coming on. And just to pick up from where the US president was talking there, he says Israel wants to do and is doing all it can to support humanitarian efforts in Gaza. Certainly from the perspective of humanitarian organizations themselves, that doesn't seem to be the case.
No, certainly not. I mean, you know, if only we lived in a universe where President Biden's description of the reality in Gaza were accurate or true. Unfortunately for, about 2.3 million Palestinians in Gaza, it couldn't be further from the truth that Israel is facilitating the entry of humanitarian aid. What Israel is doing is using starvation as a weapon of war. Human Rights Watch made that determination months ago. And for the International Criminal Court prosecutor to request arrest warrants, not only for Hamas leaders for attacks on Israeli civilians, but on Israeli leaders for continuing to perpetrate this crime, we hope sends a strong message and can make that stop.
And yet that was not what we heard when Israel was responding to South Africa's case at the ICJ, right? There were long descriptions of the number of trucks that have been allowed into Rafah, about how efforts have been made to protect civilians in hospitals, how field hospitals are popping up all over the place in the Gaza Strip. Is this an alternate reality that Israel is living in, do you think?
Yeah, there's an Israeli human rights group called Gisha that has been working on access to Palestine for many decades. And they said, if only the Israeli military put as much effort into actually getting enough aid into Gaza as they do into their public relations campaigns around that, things would be much better. You know, the number of trucks is completely insufficient. It should have been at minimum 500 per day, every day since October 7th. It's never reached anything close to that. You know, people are starving to death. Children are starving to death. People are dying of dehydration. People are still undergoing non-anesthetic amputations where medical care is even possible. It's a nightmare.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I mean, we're showing images of Gaza now as you're talking. No one is disputing the fact that a country has the right to defend itself, right? And that they do so under international law. But 35,000 people, the bulk of them women and children, at what stage is that genocide?
Yeah, so it's interesting that the International Criminal Court request for arrest warrants has not included genocide as a charge yet. That doesn't mean that it couldn't be. They did include the charge of extermination, which is a crime against humanity that applies to killing very large numbers of people. The question is one of intent, the reasons for why they would be killed. That's the only distinction from genocide. So that's not to say that the criminal court prosecutor couldn't issue a new request or amend his request and include genocide in it. But genocide, as you say, is in the case. It is the core of the case at the International Court of Justice, which is not about individual criminal acts by Netanyahu or his defense minister or Palestinian leaders. It's about Israel and Palestine's general responsibility as countries for the situation. And obviously it's Israel's responsibility for genocide that's at stake in that case. Let me just say one thing about the need for this kind of international judicial momentum, because it's not going to be enough to save people in Gaza in the short term, and I think that's terrible. But that's why we need more and more pressure from more and more countries saying Israel, the United States, any allies that can be pressured must start abiding by these orders immediately, because without international political support, now the courts have opened the way for political support. That means that other countries could use that and say, okay, we're not shipping arms anymore. No more weapons shipments are coming, because the risk of complicity in these incredibly serious international crimes is too great now. We won't ship arms anymore, and we will politically support these courts in doing what they are independently supposed to be doing. That's the only way right now that we could start saving lives in Gaza.
Speaking of the risk of complicity, surely Joe Biden and his administration are at the front of that queue when it comes to the risk of complicity. He's made no bones about the fact that he will continue to provide arms to Israel for them to exercise their right of defending their territory.
Yeah, I mean, the American administration should be on notice for exactly what you say. I mean, when you've got the International Court of Justice twice finding that provisional measures must be ordered to prevent genocide from occurring, twice, when you've got the International Criminal Court in this unprecedented move, sort of defying the known wishes of the United States, and requesting arrest warrants be approved by the judges for Israeli leaders. I mean, the United States needs to see that the house of cards is really crumbling, where the United States version of what international law and the rules-based order is completely at odds with what the actual international rules-based order is, which is that if you're an Israeli civilian or you're a Palestinian civilian, you have the equal right to life. Nobody should be starving you to death.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if this is successful, Bill, it'll be huge, right? I believe it'll be the first time that an arrest warrant of this nature issued by the ICC will be issued against a leader in the West.
I think that may be true. I mean, we have seen the issuance of arrest warrants for Vladimir Putin, of course, and his Children's Rights Commissioner. On the timing issue, that's sort of an interesting precedent, because between the time the prosecutor asked for those arrest warrants in the Russia case and the time they were approved by the court, I think it was less than a month. So, an even greater urgency, you could say, is applying to the situation in Gaza, just given the numbers of people who are starving to death. It is already an unprecedented step that this has happened because of the political realities of U.S. pressure, and yet no lives have been saved yet. So that's why we need pressure to start implementing these orders and start warning off other countries to stop throwing fuel on the fire by supplying weapons to this situation.
Right. And so what would this mean, Bill, for Benjamin Netanyahu and Hamas leaders and members of Netanyahu's war cabinet? What ultimately will it mean for them? For one, we know it'll make their world smaller, but in real terms, what does this mean?
Well, so, I mean, there's 3 Hamas leaders who've been named. 2, we believe, are in Gaza, and 1, Hania, is in Qatar, which has not signed the Rome Statute. But as you say, their world is shrinking. And for Netanyahu and Gallant, his defense minister, I mean, Israel hasn't signed the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court. Neither has the United States. But virtually every European country has.
Right.
124 countries around the world are now on notice that should either of these gentlemen, any of these gentlemen, set foot in their territory, they should be arrested and handed over to The Hague. So that's 124 countries. That is a very, very big deal.
I mean, it feels almost like it paves the way for these key people to one day face trial at The Hague.
Yes, I mean, international justice is, as everyone will tell you, very long road. It's a very long road. This case started, really, when Palestine first tried to join the International Criminal Court way back in 2009. They were not successful. They weren't considered a state at that time. Their statehood came later in 2012. They joined the court. This investigation could be looking back, by the way, at crimes committed in previous years. This current arrest warrant request only goes back to the current hostilities that started on October 7th. But the ICC investigation goes many years back and could look at many other crimes as well. So yes, this could be a game changer. And we hope that outside interference is fought off by those 124 members of the Rome Statute, those members of the states parties to the International Criminal Court. They all need to put their money where their mouth is and say, we've invested in international justice. We want impartial justice and an end to this wall of impunity that Israel-Palestine civilians have been facing for so many decades. But now's the time you've really got to stand up for the court, because it is the court of last resort, and that's where these victims, that's all that's left for them. Yeah,
absolutely. In the meantime, as you say, the killing continues, the starving continues, women and children continue to bear the brunt of what's happening in Gaza. Bill, let me thank you for your time this afternoon. Bill is the acting Israel and Palestine Associate Director at Human Rights Watch.